Good evening. So this is the last one of the day. I guess you all want to go home and have food. But before that, I have some things to say. So, who knows where this is? Some guesses? Some ideas? Gent. Gent, yeah.
That's where the first DevOpsDays was hosted.
Everybody thinks this is Gent, but this is Antwerp. This is the marble room in the Antwerp Zoo, where at a cloud camp in 2009, Patrick and I met, and we had the crazy idea to run this conference, because we had been speaking at a lot of conferences. We were talking about open source infrastructure, we were talking about automation, and Patrick was talking more about agile things, and we were basically figuring out, like, hey, what about we do something small, like 60, 70 people, invite a bunch of our best friends, and do a conference where we actually talk to each other. And that's where we got the idea, and we then eventually did it in Ghent, because we had a venue there. So we started with really small conference. I think if the list is online of the people who were actually at the very first DevOps Days, it's somewhere between 60 and 70 people. And that idea grew. A bunch of people were like, hey, this was really the best conference ever. I've learned so much, made so many new friends. And people went home and got the idea to do the same in Sydney, Mountain View, Sao Paulo the year after. And in Europe, we went to Hamburg, and then we went to Göteborg, and then we went to Rome. And it took us 4 years to go from basically having one event in Europe and a couple in the rest of the world to 2013, when we had 2 events in London, Paris, Amsterdam, and then things started growing. When we did the 10th year anniversary in Ghent in 2019, there were basically events happening all over the world, and I think that year we had somewhere about 75 or 80 events worldwide, like this one, like Geneva, like a couple of others. And if you look at where we started, where we look at the people who came to the very first DevOps Days, there were people who had a significant, long-standing experience in open source, but open source both contributing, running, and actually doing it in production for over 10 years. People who understood what Agile was. They were actively trying to practice Agile. And we were also at the very beginning of cloud. Like, we were adopting public cloud, we were figuring out how to deal with public cloud, we were building private clouds. And if you look at the discussions that happened then, at the intersection of that is basically where DevOps got started. And that part of the history is also where initially things were really strong. We started it as an open source conference. We started it within our philosophies as we can build this, we can show these things, and we can collaborate with the open source principles, but also with the tools and the technology. So if you ask me what is my definition of DevOps, then this is it. It's basically a global movement to improve the quality of software delivery, leveraging open source experience, which we started in Ghent in 2009. And it's a really bloody slide. And actually, this slide is taken from, it's on there, from a talk I gave together with Patrick at DevOps in Antwerp in 2010, where we were basically comparing developers and operations people as werewolves and vampires. So, who am I? I'm Kris. I started my career the previous millennium as a developer. I wrote software in all kinds of languages, Perl, Java, C. And then I became an ops person, because I was at some point the only one who knew how to rack a machine and how to cluster a Spark station and how to do all those things. My day-to-day job is running one of the larger open source consultancies in Europe. Next to that, we've done a spin-up which is focusing on open source observability. And I'm still active in a bunch of DevOps days. I'm not an active core anymore. I'm advisory core, which means I get to tell the new core people how they should run DevOpsDays as an organization, and I've also started config management, camp and load days, and a couple of other things. But sadly, what people mostly realize is when they run into a DNS problem, they curse at me, because the title of my blog has been for 20-something years, everything's a freaking DNS problem. So, why this talk? I used to have much more here. I used to probably be much less grumpy, but I think it's still valuable to look at history and see why we're here and what we've been doing and what we need to fix again. So I heard this morning somebody say, like, yeah, it's about throwing stuff over the wall. Like, this literally was our life. Friday, 5 p.m., marketing department figures out, hey, we have a new website. Here's a firewall. Can you throw this online? Like, what do you mean, throw this online? We don't have machines for this. We don't have servers for this. Do you need a database? How many users do you expect? Oh, no, we're actually going to go live on national television, on national radio with a commercial about this at 6. Like, what? How do you install this? Nobody knew. That was 2001, 2002, the story. And old is between quotes, because I don't think anything has changed. And if I look at change, then to me one of the best things to look at the evolution of where we came from is look at DevOps Days. So most DevOps Days have the same format, which is formal talks like this, but also a lot of open spaces. Open spaces are a bit different here, but in a lot of DevOps Days, the open spaces are basically in the afternoon, there's no talks anymore, there's multiple open spaces next to each other, and right after lunch or before lunch, people actually start as a whole conference audience to vote on the different topics they want. And the evolution of the topics at those events is, to me, in a way, where as a community we came from and where we have evolved to. So if I look at the really, really early days, if we look at topics in culture, what we were talking about was how to do Agile correctly. Like, how to do Kanban for operations, talking about lean and talking about all of those things. And now, well, we struggle with Agile. People talk about their broken Agile implementations. And it's not really that good. So we used to have the poster charts. We used to have Etsy and we used to have Spotify and all those cool kids where we're doing really awesome things. And what we have now is, well, enterprises talking about what they were doing and then maybe not talking about what they were actually doing. And we moved from success stories to, well, more failure stories. We moved to people talking about how they didn't succeed in doing what they wanted, talking about failure, talking about burnout. So, culture-wise, the initial group was really, yeah, this is working, this is really good. But right now, we're at a point where we're struggling with how do we grow this? How does this become much better? Culture, obviously, is one of the most important parts, but when we look at the automation part, we were talking about hardcore implementations and tools that were helping us forward. We were talking about infrastructure as code with tools like Chef, Puppet, CF Engine. And right now, what are we talking about? Who's the YAML engineer? Do you like it? Have we improved? Or do we consider YAML just data? I mean, we moved from talking about how we use tools to achieve desired state, to achieve reproducibility, to actually make things easier. And we've come to a point now where people are not writing code anymore and not benefiting from the fact that they were using code, but just copy and pasting config around again. We've eventually gone full circle on recreating the problem that we tried to solve with infrastructure as code. So, yeah. A couple of things changed. I mean, tools that used to be there don't exist anymore, but a couple still exist. Like Jenkins is still around and still being used. Only we don't click around anymore in the UI. We now use pipeline as code and write actual code that generates our pipelines. So in some places, we have improved. But whose deployment is just a bunch of shell scripts running kube apply -f? Yeah, figured that. So we were talking about continuous delivery. We were talking about continuous deployment. We were talking about how to do trunk-based development and basically use those tools to deliver software faster. And we made some mistakes, like things like git flow. I mean, the author apologized by now. But we were really trying to understand how release management was working. What are we doing now? We need to tell people and we need to teach people that long-running branches are shooting themselves in the foot and that they're not doing continuous integration, but continuous isolation and continuous disintegration. I mean, it's a topic you can discuss for hours, but if you're doing continuous delivery, please read Jez Humble's book. If you're doing open source development, it's a different topic. So, software delivery has changed to a faster pace. We have better tools to do things, but people are still struggling with the same problems they did as when they had huge SVN trees next to each other, because they haven't really understood how to use things. Who remembers when John Vincent on Twitter shouted, "Monitoring sucks"? 2013, I guess. Because the monitoring ecosystem back then there was a bunch of bloated commercial tools that didn't work. Who remember Nagios? We're still running a Kinga, but it's a totally different beast. Cacti, like things like RRD, they were good, they were fun. But also we couldn't scale those setups, we couldn't automate them. And then monitoring really wasn't fun. And then we started combining automation with the monitoring tools, and we started doing things like Logstash and Kibana, and we started actually automating our monitoring tools. And DevOpsDays Rome, Ulf Manson gave a talk about his newfound love for monitoring. And we went from monitoring sucks to monitoring love. But that was because of two facts. Like, there was a new group of open source tools that were really much better than the generation before. But it was also about automation and not manually going into some config file and editing it so that it basically didn't work anymore. New tools popped up because different approaches into monitoring. Things like Prometheus started happening. And now we have observability, which is going to fix everything. And OpenTelemetry, which is magically going to orchestrate everything you currently don't. So monitoring has evolved. It's actually one of the things where things really have evolved. When we talk about cloud, basically we had multiple options to do virtualization back then. We had Xen, KVN, we could have containers running. We had tools like Vagrant, like the idea of giving a developer something that looked really, really close to production, so they could build things and not be confronted with, oh, wait, this is not how we run things in production, we don't have this. We were talking about doing high availability and really looking at applications on where do you put the state of the application, how does it know, does it need to know? We were teaching developers how to make sure that they could do things scalable. And we were talking about distributed file systems like Ceph, things like Gluster. I'm not going to call DRBD a distributed file system, but we were talking about those technologies and how to really use them. And we had lots of different alternatives into building private clouds. Over the past 10 years, that has completely changed. Right now, there's one technology people talk about. It's Docker, Docker, Docker. And then they figure out that Docker doesn't solve a bunch of the things, so they add Kubernetes, because you need orchestration. And on what file system is your data living now? You're laughing, so what is it running on? It's on NFS. Who remembers NFS? When did we abandon NFS? I thought we abandoned it somewhere in 2005. I remember Olaf Kirk giving back then the NFS maintainer, giving a talk at LinuxConf, don't remember which one, where every single slide he had was NFS in top. And it was network failure system, no file system, need for speed, and he could go on the whole talk. And for a lot of the enterprises today, that is their prime file system because we still haven't solved it. So, Docker is awesome for a developer. It's an awesome tool that allows you to do everything we did with Vagrant LXC, but much easier. But it also was one of the biggest problems we created. Because now, a developer built something which is, I don't know what he did. And he comes to you and then he says, now put this in production. So yeah, they stopped talking. They just threw a container over the wall. And they added even more complexity. Kube is awesome if you need it. Boo here has really an architecture that is fully microservices, stateless, that really is going to benefit from Kube. Show me some hands. I see 2 people raising their hands. The rest is either already so far asleep
Who's asleep?
or not. Yeah, who's awake? Okay, so yeah. The whole room, 2 people actually say, I have a use case. Who's running Kube? Because it's easy to go that simple but wrong way, but it's really hard to take that complex approach. And what we've seen is that we have this problem. We need to fix it. We're going to take this fancy new tool. We're going to take Kube, we're going to take Nomad, whatever, because there's other orchestrators out there. And then we're not going to change how we actually use it. So 6 months down the road, you got a fancy new tool. You still need to maintain the old one, but you haven't solved the problem. And we're doing this with infrastructure as code tools. We're doing this with orchestration tools. We're doing this with monitoring tools. We're going to do this with machine learning and with all the other tools again. Can we please stop doing that? You're laughing now, but yeah. Observability, your monitoring is broke, observability is going to fix it. No, really, it's really going to fix it, because if you change from a Kinga to Prometheus, your alert fatigue is going to be gone. Or not. The trick to fix alert fatigue, the trick to fix monitoring, is to have a single source of truth and automate it. But most people is not going to do that. So why? I mean, I'm old enough to be able to say that I think this industry is really great at killing things. And I'll show you a couple of examples. So who loves ITIL? It's dead, right? I mean, I worked in organizations where it was a Bible and not a library. And you need to take every little step, step by step, literally. And there was, Friday at 10 a.m. in the morning, a meeting where basically people said, no. But why? No. They were right saying no, but not in the right way. And if you take a step back, it's a really awesome library with good ideas. And the idea is, let's reduce risk. Continuous delivery is about reducing risk because we're going to do smaller increments, we're going to do them faster, we're going to detect bugs earlier. So it's about reducing risk. What if we take a bunch of those principles and let machines make those decisions? Have your CI in the pipeline decide if it's right or wrong. And then we're lowering the downtime, and we're doing that constantly. And it's the same principles. So it'll automate it at high speed. It's basically what we want. But it's a different language. And it's people who talk about automation rather than people talk about procedures. So that failed. Is Agile dead? I heard some discussion today. Sorry?
It's never born.
It was never born. That's another way. How many organizations are really agile? Lots of people say, hey, we're agile because we're doing Jira and stand-ups. Or they do SAFE. What does SAFE stand for?
Agile for enterprise.
Exactly.
That's Martin Fowler.
Martin Fowler is recorded, and you can Google that, you can find it on internet. Martin Fowler, one of the Agile fathers, actually called SAFE shitty Agile for enterprises. To me, SAFE is something different. It is the best waterfall methodology out there. So it's still better than something else, but yeah. So no, it's not that. Most people just never seen it. People never actually worked in an agile way because organizations had ruined that for them. So who killed DevOps? Well, I guess we did. Management too, but I guess we did. Because we were definitely initially focusing on a bunch of the wrong topics. Like, I gave a talk for ages, which at some point had an underlying European tour thing, which was 7 tools for your DevOps stack. And it was actually 6 fun tools, and then a really huge, big part about, it is about human beings, it's about collaboration. Guess what? Most people adopted the first 6 ones and forgot about the real message of the story. We had long discussions about Puppet versus Chef versus Ansible, and now it's Terraform versus Pulumi or whatever, and the whole discussion was basically, yes, use a tool, but stop discussing which one. You'll figure out which one is going to be good for you, but start adopting tools, start doing things. We had marketing people who called Docker the ultimate DevOps tool. And then we had people who basically implemented all of the tools. Like, yeah, that's not going to work. But somebody said management. I think it's worse. I think it's recruiters that started killing DevOps. Because they started to hunt for DevOps engineers. Who's a DevOps engineer? Is it a developer? Is it an ops person? What is a DevOps engineer? Where do you put the DevOps engineer? Do you put them next to the Agile practitioner or next to the collaborator? I don't know. Typically, what recruiters look for is a senior Linux engineer, but they only want to pay for a junior. And Ken Muggeridge found out this fun job offer. Apart from the fact that I don't think many people would want to relocate to Newcastle upon Tyne, but it was not paying anything, which is probably the right price. And then managers started to kick in, and they created the DevOps team. there's so many different variants, but I coached a large Dutch bank for a couple of years, and when I arrived there, they basically had figured out nothing better than to put their developers and put their operations people and put them together in one team. And they called it the DevOps team, and they had 150 DevOps teams. It's a totally different story, but in a way that actually worked because they were creating cross-functional teams. And they were eliminating half of their management by all doing so, because they had a manager for the developers, a manager for the operations people, but at some point when the teams got merged, they realized like, well, there's one too much here, right? So a DevOps team is that then the team in charge of tooling? Is that the team that runs the CI infrastructure? Is that the team that runs things? But most organizations, when they create a DevOps team, they just created a new silo between the developers and the operations people. And, well, the worst thing I've seen was to get from code written by a developer to production was 7 different teams. And one of the teams in the middle was the DevOps team, but the release engineering team and the QA team and the pre-production team and the production team, they were all there. But that organization was doing DevOps because they had a DevOps team and they could manually go to production every quarter. Who's certified? We've been joking with this for a while. So DevOps Days 2014, the 5th year anniversary, the badge the people got was actually a certificate. And is it large enough? Yes, you can actually see what's on there. So those people actually got a badge which said Master in DevOps from the University of Dev and Ooops. The joke is Bernd Erk, who runs DevOps Days Berlin, and is also a global core organizer. He actually beat us to the ID, because DevOps Days Berlin, the month before, was giving out stamps for certificates. They actually put another thing to it. You need to come back to DevOps Days Berlin for renewal every year. So, what are you certified for? Like, ITIL certification, what I see when people tell me they're ITIL certified, it means they understand not what they're doing, but they know what's in the book and they can follow the procedures. When I walk into an office and I see a Scrum Master with a Scrum certificate, it's typically hanging right next to the Prince2 certificate, which kind of means that they don't understand what they're doing, and they're literally just got another certificate but haven't changed a single thing. So yeah, well, who certifies people in being good at DevOps? Does that mean they're good to work with, that they're good at collaborating? How can you do that in a test? I mean, yes, there's some value in having training and teaching people and saying, yes, you follow this training, but certifying them? I've seen so many certificates where basically it was just another revenue source for the vendor. And how can you do that when you're not a vendor? So, there is one exception though. The Scaled Agile DevOps certification. Just say it out loud. I mean, it's so sad. But it is a true one. You can get certified for Scaled Agile DevOps. So the thing with not having a manifest, which is something we discussed in the first couple of years. DevOps Days Gent, we had an open space. Do we need a manifest? DevOps Days Hamburg, we had one. Do we need a manifest? In Mountain View, we also had a discussion. And it was pretty much by the community back then agreed, we don't need a manifest. We don't want one because the Agile manifest didn't work too. I've worked with Agile coaches who didn't know what the Agile manifest was. The worst I had with Agile coaches was one in the Netherlands who came like, what does that stand for again? AGI? Like, no, boy. Sadly, it's not a joke, it's reality. So people are gonna come and tell you, this is DevOps, while it actually isn't DevOps. I think this morning we had a good quiz. There are so many people who are going to say, this is DevOps, while it's not. Just like Agile and people who are practicing safe, they're still happily doing waterfall, but they're not doing Agile. So if you're actually trying to do something that should be called DevOps, don't call it a DevOps transformation. Call it something else. Call it engineering 2.0. Call it faster deployment. Because the moment you say within the organization that you're working, we're going to do this DevOps thing, you're lost for eternal discussions. People are actually going to read some blog post and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. And then somebody else is going to say, no, we're going to do this. And if you call it engineering 2.0 or whatever, then you can actually list your own goals within the organization and work towards those. But if you call it DevOps, you're going to probably be discussing more than doing things. So, we're 14 years later. We're planning a 15th year birthday. Actually, Patrick's idea. He's not organizing DevOps Days anymore, but last year in Amsterdam, I was like, hey, we're going to do something in 2 years in Gent. Like, okay, fine. I came back from the not KubeCon, but not Nomad, but the other orchestrator that now is not as popular anymore. It's been so long ago that I don't even remember which one. I came back from there. Now I'm stuck in figuring out how that thing was called. DCOS, and then whatever. It will pop up in half an hour. I give a talk there on the challenges of adopting new technologies, the challenges of going from single system image clusters to high availability to public cloud to containers, where always the same problem is when an application has state, where is the data, how do you access it? And if you had a single system image cluster, we put it on a file system that could be accessed. When you have high availability, you need to make sure that it's being spread over all the nodes, that it's being distributed. For public cloud, it's the same, and most developers still write to file system, local disk, whatever. And containers, still same problem. So I had been giving a talk about that in Amsterdam, and the day after I was actually at a customer. It was a Friday morning, and suddenly there's some person from a different department say, here's a tarball, can you put this in production? Only that tarball now was a Docker image. Well, you know, like 6 months ago when we proposed to maybe do something with containers, we could have set up a proof of concept, we could have set up something for orchestration, we could have set up a kube cluster. I know. We need to put this in production now. So we got a tarball, and then because that tarball couldn't actually be extracted, we got a single Docker file. Docker built failed because, oh, this is a corporate network. You cannot access half of the things you want to download from the internet. And why is this thing basically running insecure and all of those things? And I was like, we haven't solved anything. And today still, you see all of those things happening. Who's now responsible for security of a container? Who's now talking about we're now talking about supply chain for software, because somewhere along the lines, security and operations people were worried about what we put in production, and we had 800 identical Red Hat nodes or Debian nodes, and we knew what was running on there. We knew what was deployed. Now we have 800 containers, and we have no clue what's in there, because some developer built it. And we needed to figure out how to monitor those, and we need to figure out how to do backups. And now I don't have that slide today, but do you know what an enterprise container looks like? It's a full operating system with a backup agent in there, running a database, running everything, and people SSH into it. Oh yeah. I hope they don't exist that much anymore. A couple of years ago in Copenhagen, there was a conference where some hotshot, one of the big 5 consultancies, was preaching how to use that. And the reason why people started adopting this is because the developers could spin up a container faster than they could go to central IT and request a VM. So they figured out, what if we ask a huge, big, fat virtual machine and run everything in there in containers? Solving the wrong problem and having data corruption on the go. So, what have we really learned? As an industry, we run in circles. Yeah, even the girl that went to DevOpsDays Amsterdam, she's running in circles. Because she's going to figure out what we learned 10 years ago. And once you're old enough, so gray hair or no hair anymore, you'll notice the spots and you'll see, we did this, we solved this problem. Why are we doing this again? And the real problem is, nobody listens because we're the old, annoying people. That's not fun. So, things that have really helped us in getting there is cargo culting. Like, hey, Google is doing this. We should do this too. Yeah, but you're not Google. LinkedIn is doing this. Venture-driven development. A startup in Silicon Valley, what is the product they're selling? The company. They're not selling a tool. They're not building an audience. They're building value for investors. So they've got two options. 2 years, end of money, either they're being sold or they're gone. Resilience. If there's no user, why do I need to look at this? Why do I need to think about how to implement things correctly? So, YOLO, we'll just build it, run it, and it's going to fail. It's a totally different mentality from running and building software that's going to have to run for the next decade. And you need to figure out how to maintain it and update it. That's engineering. That's not YOLO ops. Resume-driven development. I need to get to the next gig, so I'm going to look at this fancy tool and I'm going to try to learn that. Because all the companies are listing that they need these and these technologies. And then you arrive there and you figure out, oh, why am I writing bash scripts all day? There is no Cube cluster here, but the job description said I needed Cube experience. And hype or conference-driven development. I bet there's going to be people here who are going to go to the office on Wednesday or at home, and they're going to figure out and start playing with the fancy new tool they learned about today, because that's fun. And as long as they don't put it in production by Friday, it's probably good. But there's going to be people who basically, well, today, are going to go over the list of things they learned in Amsterdam, and they're going to put them in production by Wednesday. And they're going to be failing by Friday. Because that was the fancy new thing that everybody was talking about, but nobody was actually doing it. So, I've noticed that most large enterprises are probably nowhere even close to DevOps, or even Agile. It's even worse, because they basically bottom down to all the way up. The engineer on the floor says, well, it's still broken, it doesn't deploy. Talks to his manager says, yeah, it's almost fixed, it might be deployed. Talks to his manager, says, yeah, well, it was deployed. And he talks to the VPs and the C-level people, said, yep, it's all running great, it's all funny. And the engineer on the floor is like, I never said that. And that's their culture. That's their default behavior, because they cannot bring bad news. Result, people burn out, people fail. I worked, and I stopped doing that. I worked with a lot of organizations trying to transform, trying to change, and the ones that succeeded, that were really good ones, that were really happy stories, but I've seen way more people who, after trying to change the organization they're working with, either left or burned out. It's really hard. So I stopped doing that because it's not fun anymore. The success stories we heard. they're sometimes not always success stories. Like, if you look at large organizations, it might be about one team. It might be about one team that really improved things, but typically not really company-wide. And I know a couple of cases of organizations that I coached myself where it was the one team that was on stage talking, but the rest of the group was there like, yeah, but that's not the story. There's chapters in books written about things that never happened. Yeah, the big bank in the Netherlands. You can Google which one. So are we here yet? No. I don't think we're even close to being finished. I think organizations evolve. Like when we started DevOpsDays, my own company was 25 people. Now we're getting to 200. It's totally different. There's different challenges, and we onboard new people, and we need to train them, and we need to learn them things, because the things you are used to do as a group of 6 people, which is normal because you've always done them that way, when new people join, you need to explain them, we're doing this because that failed and that's there, and there's a reason why we're doing it this way. And if you don't tell them, they're gonna run into those walls that you already ran into again. And there's gonna be new technologies. And I mean, I might rant about people abusing things like Docker and Cube, but if you're doing it the right way and if you have the use case, it's absolutely awesome. And we need to learn how to use those tools correctly and to figure out, like, do we have the use case? And then adopt those best practices we have. Then figure out how to do GitHub the right way, which means by not having multiple branches running and having multiple cut and paste of our configs over our different environments, because that's something we already solved. So that experience and taking that is what we need to do. We need to make sure that people don't do this. I've never done this, but apparently it hurts. So everybody who's here, well, you have a lot of work today, because we're not DevOps engineers, we're teachers, we're students. We have to build bridges, we have to write code, we have to troubleshoot, we have to even be a shrink. And figure out, listen to people, work together, and try to understand why people are trying to do what they're trying to do. And that's much, much, much more than just being an engineer, writing code, and putting it in production. And DevOps really is, it's not about those tools. The tools are going to be fun, but it's really about people, about talking to each other, about working together, and about collaboration. And I hope that that is what you actually learn from DevOpsDays, and not your new fancy Cube tool. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kris. Wow. Long day, but we have time for questions. If you have any questions for Kris. Yes, Marco. Yeah, there's a queue lining up. I'll bring you the microphone.
Great talk. I agree about everything. It was fantastic. So I have 2 questions. The first one is a little bit of about self-reflecting, right? I agree. It's all about people, and we did a lot of mistakes as an industry, hyping tools, hyping these of that vendor, these of that technology. But what I see at conferences around the world is these talks keeps coming there. How to use Kubernetes, how to use this, how to use that, how you this tool, that tool. Also because I suspect the money comes from the sponsors that send the people to talk about those tools. So what about taking a stand as conferences and say, we do not want anymore talks about this or that tool? That could be an idea to try to steer the industry away from this culture. And the second question is, can you please put back the slide with the shooting on the foot? I love it. I didn't have the time to take a picture. Thank you very much. It was great.
The slides are available. Yeah, there's probably a variant of this already online somewhere. It's really hard to change that in a way. Like we tried a couple of things already. Fundamentally, you need money to run an event. We had the idea for DevOpsDays again 2017 to run with no sponsors. We never went for it. There was little sponsors, but it should be possible to run an event if you have a venue like this, or if you can get a free venue where basically people pay just enough to get the food or don't have food and run it for free. I mean, I run conflict management camp. It's totally free. But we have sponsors because, well, we fly in a couple of speakers, so there is a cost. But if you started as one conference, it's not going to work. And it really is, follow the money is definitely one of the things that is important. Things like KubeCon, it's huge. There is a lot of money involved. They're never going to go to a point where people are not going to be paying. Like, look at the KubeCon keynotes, all the top sponsors. That's the talks you get. I think what you're saying, you need to turn it around. You need to stop showing up at those events.
Yeah, I am quite controversial in my topics. In fact, KubeCon published some article of mine, but they don't want me.
More questions?
Nathalie, where's the microphone?
I have two microphones.
Stereo.
Oh, yeah. When talking about the transformations of enterprises, like the big organizations going on, or small organizations going on a DevOps transformation project, typically what happens is you have engineers and like teams on the ground who are really eager and full of ideas and of what they can do and what's the strategy and what's the culture and how they're going to collaborate. From your experience, what's the most typical bottleneck where that eagerness, that energy is not enough to keep going and to transform the organization as a whole?
Down on the floor, engineers are motivated. They want to change. They want to do things that is going to make their life better, that's going to make their life easier. All the way on top management, those people, they got there for a reason, because they worked hard, because they were doing things the right way, and they got there. But there's a huge bunch of people in the middle. The Peter principle. People who, in a way, careers in IT, like you're an engineer, you're a junior engineer, at some point, in a lot of organizations, the only way to get a raise is to become a manager. And a manager is a totally different job. It's something completely different. But you lose good engineers that become a manager because within that organization, that's the only way they can financially grow. So you end up with those people who are, at that point, useless, blocking things, and you cannot let them go. Coming back to the large Dutch bank, they fired 1,500 people. Which layer do you think they fired? That was a huge improvement. You can probably, I mean, I don't want to do that talk again now. It's recorded, it's online, there's a couple of variants out there. But the things they did, they had people basically reapply for their own jobs. They had people who were not motivated say, hey, you know, go somewhere else. They were saying you need to be employable. So even if you're learning tools here that you're not going to use here, we're going to let you go. It's for your best that you learn them. But that part really is the biggest one. Like, there's so many people in organizations that are not helping the organization forward. I'd like to say that to me, there's no IT shortage. There's just too many people in the middle blocking things that we cannot actually do our job. And then there's change. Like, you got, in most change, no, I don't have that slide. Well, I have it somewhere, but. So there's typically 20% of early adopters who go like, yeah, we want to do this. We want to actually work the new way. And then there's going to be like 60% who says, yeah, okay, if they're doing this, then we're going to follow, we're going to do whatever you want. And there's going to be the 20% of people in that organization always who are going to say, nope. And when I was giving workshops a lot of the times, you basically saw that the 20% of people that didn't want to change, those were the ones hiding in the back, and those were the ones you need to get rid of as soon as possible. But that's really hard. But that is a typical change transition, like figuring out who's going to be those 20% of people that block. And then the last thing to add to that question, because I could actually do a whole talk on that. I've done whole talks on that. Michael Brunson's Paul, who was in GDS for, might still be there, at some point called it the antibodies who kick in. Large organizations, at some point, basically, you've changed so much that the antibodies kick in and say, no, this is where we stop. And then things completely freeze. And that's an interesting thing to think about. There's one there.
Hi. Hello. I totally agree with you about culture, everything. Sorry, I would like to talk about some new tools. So there is a new tools called Zero Ops tools. They don't solve everything, okay, but at least you don't talk about Docker and Kubernetes anymore when you use those tools. So maybe it's kind of improvement.
Zero ops. So
yeah.
Who's doing the ops then?
So you don't have, it's tool, you don't have to care about Kubernetes, it's managed for you. You don't have to care about Docker, everything, even the database. There is one tool called Calyx, which is very interesting because you don't, it manages the state, distributed state, and you don't have to manage the database also. It's nice, it's an elegant way to manage the distributed state at scale. So maybe that's in the program.
Maybe we should do an open space about those tools tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then people can put them in production on Wednesday. Friday at 5 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't have to manage Kubernetes and...
I don't manage Kubernetes. I run it, I build it, I let other people do that when they have the use case. And actually, you know, if you really have need for just enough containers, use Nomad. It's good for just enough container orchestration. Much easier. If you want to talk about tools, there's one there. Oh, there's one all the way in the back.
Hi. First of all, I loved your take on recruiters ruining DevOps. Immediately send it to my recruiter, told her I told you so. But other than that, I was wondering about how do we take DevOps to scale? Because I remember when I went to my first DevOps days and I came back so excited. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to let everyone know and we're going to do this culture and it's going to be amazing. And now it's like a few years later, and I know that it's so hard. Not everyone attends these conferences. Not everyone is. Not everyone sees this material, and it just takes a lot of time to explain and digest this kind of culture. So I guess my question is, A, do you believe it's possible, like to have everyone understand DevOps? If it's not, then what's the alternative? What are we doing in order to still have good organizations that have these practices without everyone fully understanding DevOps?
I don't think it's going to be all over the place and adopted by everyone. And I think actually the answer to that question is survival is optional. I mean, the people that don't want, let them not want, but if you're looking for an organization where you have that culture and you have those practices, leave, find another place. I mean, there's always going to be organizations that are not going to do what we want to do, and they're going to fail, and they're going to have crashing systems and downtime, and they're going to be on national television because, well, the banks, not the Dutch one, but it's going to be in the news that some bank did a migration over the weekend and all the accounts have been blocked for the week after. Like, it's happening. They're probably not having a bunch of the best practices that we talk about in place. Are they going to change? No, probably not. Do they have to? I don't know. I stopped caring about it.
Thanks.